Welcome to this module on climate change and biodiversity loss, which is part of the Work Package 7 on Sustainable Development within the Ingenium Alliance. In this module, we will explore climate change and biodiversity and their economic, environmental and social impacts on businesses, people and society. The module's learning objectives focus on exploring the sustainability implications of the two phenomena. Emphasis is placed on raising awareness of the importance of protecting plant and animal biodiversity and the need to mitigate the negative effects on climate change. Furthermore, our presentation shows the close connections between the two topics. This slide outlines the starting point and the current situation regarding biodiversity loss and climate change. Planetary boundaries is a scientific framework that defines the environmental limits within which humanity can operate safely without risking the stability of the Earth and the functioning of its ecosystems. The concept was first introduced in 2009 by a group of researchers led by Johan Rockström from the Stockholm Resilience Center. The framework includes 9 key areas, planetary boundaries, as shown in the figure on the left. Exceeding these boundaries increases the risk of triggering irreversible changes in the Earth system, which could jeopardize the conditions necessary for life on the planet. The figure also indicates that climate change and biodiversity loss are 2 of the planetary boundaries we have already exceeded. The extreme weather phenomena are unfortunately becoming increasingly frequent, such as floods, droughts, and heat waves, highlighting the urgent need for action on climate and environmental issues. In this regard, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change labeled climate change as a code red warning for humanity, thus underlying its impacts on people, planet, ecosystems, and biodiversity. The picture on the right shows the World Economic Forum 2025 Global Risk Ranking in terms of severity over the next decades. This ranking highlights that extreme weather events and biodiversity loss are the top 2 environmental risks, further strengthening the need for urgent action. A definition of climate change can be tracked back to the last century, in 1992 by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which defines it as change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere and which is, in addition to natural climate variability, observed over comparable time periods. Human and economic activities and the resulting greenhouse gas emissions are recognized as the main drivers of global warming, with negative implications on extreme climate events, biodiversity, oceans, and human health across regions. To explain what biodiversity means, the definition from the 1992 UN Convention on Biological Diversity is often cited. According to this definition, biodiversity refers to the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, terrestrial, marine, and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. It includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. Let's have a look at some data on climate change. The 2023 Sustainable Development Goals report by the United Nations reveals that the Earth has reached its tipping point and is on the so-called brink of climate calamity. Furthermore, the planet is expected to exceed 1.5 degrees by 2035, face a 2.5 degrees warming, and experience a sea level rise by 21,000. Therefore, a deep and rapid decrease in GHG emissions is needed to reach the ambitious carbon neutrality target by 2050. In this regard, the chart highlights the ongoing increase in the global annual temperature in recent decades, compared to pre-industrial levels. Within the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations, Sustainable Development Goal 13 is a reminder of the need to take urgent action to fight climate change and its effects by reducing GHG emissions and other air pollutants. SDG 13 sets out several targets to address climate change, and everyone, including individuals, governments and organizations worldwide, is required to commit to a sustainable future. Now we're going to look at what is happening to the biodiversity. The number of species is decreasing fast. The extinction rate is high. According to scientists, we are in the 6th mass extinction, and this is because of us, humans. Human activities have affected or altered much of the Earth's ecosystems. In many cases, this has led to degraded and fragmented ecosystems, making it impossible for many species to survive. In 2019, the IPBES, that is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, presented the first comprehensive report on the state of the world's biodiversity and ecosystem services. The situation is described as serious. More species than ever in human history are threatened with extinction, and many ecosystems are changing at a rapid pace. Estimates show that around half to 1 million of today's over 8 million species are at risk of extinction within a few decades, if powerful measures are not taken to stop the negative trend. In the same report, IPBES stated that the global rate of species extinction is already at least 10 to 100 times higher than the average rate over the past 10 million years, and it's accelerating. In the figure on the right, you can see the cumulative percentage of species extinctions for the organism groups: fishes, reptiles, birds, mammals, and amphibians from the year 1500 to the year 2018. As you can see, the extinction rates increased sharply during the last century. New species are also formed, but the extinction rate is higher than the speciation rate, so the total number of species in the world is decreasing. Within the UN's 2030 agenda, there are also global goals aimed at protecting and conserving biodiversity, both in aquatic ecosystems, as in SDG 14, and in terrestrial ecosystems, as in SDG 15. The picture in this slide shows the threats to the climate and biodiversity. The circle on the right, in green, highlights the risks resulting from biodiversity loss, and the circle on the left, in blue, displays the threats to biodiversity. Some of these risks are common to both issues and are represented in the middle area, where the two circles intersect. Therefore, Many environmental threats are not isolated but interrelated, impacting both climate and biodiversity. The most critical of these threats are global warming, extreme weather events, pollution, deforestation, and eutrophication, which lead to a decrease in animal and plant species, the worsening of air quality, and the melting of glaciers. The environmental impacts of climate change are multiple and multifaceted, affecting ecosystems, species, the global economy, and natural processes worldwide. The ongoing increase in greenhouse gas emissions due to human activity has altered natural systems. These impacts can be grouped into 4 main categories, which in turn lead to further environmental effects. Therefore, the key consequences are rising global temperatures and extreme weather events, melting of polar ice and glaciers, ecosystem disruption and biodiversity loss, and ocean acidification. The increase in average global temperatures is linked to extreme weather events such as heat waves, droughts, storms, and floods. Moreover, as global warming intensifies, the ice in the Arctic and Antarctic is melting, consequently causing the sea level rises with negative consequences for coastal ecosystems and animal habitats. Climate change is causing significant disruption to ecosystems across the globe. Many animals are migrating to escape rising temperatures, and there are serious risks for food chains. The last key environmental impact of climate change is ocean acidification, which occurs when the pH of seawater changes. This harms marine species that struggle to survive. Climate change affects several aspects of human society, including health, social stability, migration, and social inequalities. 4 main consequences can be identified: global security, human health impact, migration and climate refugees, societal inequalities. Global security can be undermined in areas with limited resources, which may lead to conflicts and increased competition for food, water, and land. Concurrently, extreme weather events impact human health, increasing heat-related illnesses, mental health issues, and vector-borne diseases. Deteriorating environmental conditions, such as sea level rise and droughts, push people to migrate towards low-lying coastal areas or away from arid regions. These climate refugees often face challenging conditions and social tensions in their new locations. As a consequence, climate change events affect vulnerable populations, those with limited resources and less ability to adapt, that may lack the financial means to recover from natural disasters. This inequality raises poverty rates and reduces development opportunities. Hence, inclusive action is needed to mitigate these social impacts and strive for a stable and equitable future. Academic researchers have emphasized that climate change is not just an ecological issue, because it has also become an economic phenomenon. Thus, climate change also affects businesses and economic activities. The picture on the slide summarizes the main European and international macro-level policies and measures taken in recent decades to address climate change and its environmental impacts. Starting with the UN Convention on Climate Change in 1992 And moving on to the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, the Agenda 2030, and some European actions, including the Green Deal, the taxonomy, the climate law, and the climate strategy. All these measures share the common purpose of reducing GHG emissions and limiting the increase of global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Europe's final aim is to achieve climate neutrality by 2050 and support the transition to sustainable growth. Climate change also affects multiple dimensions of businesses, including strategy, supply chain management, planning, and investment. These impacts manifest as both risks and opportunities. The framework of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures identified the main categories of risks and opportunities associated with climate change. Organizations are expected to account for climate-related risks and opportunities, which may be physical or transition-related. Physical risks depend on the physical effects of climate change events that could damage corporate facilities and equipment, while transition risks are those related to shifting towards a lower carbon economy. Looking more closely, physical risks can be acute when driven by extreme weather events or chronic, resulting from long-term climate changes such as temperature and sea level rise, biodiversity loss, and water restrictions. The occurrence of physical risks can turn into negative financial impacts in terms of cost increases, loss of revenue, and damage to natural assets. Transition risks are those related to the shift towards a lower carbon economy. They result in policy, legal, technology, market, and reputational changes that may affect companies' mitigation and adaptation actions. Examples could be companies being forced to promote adaptation measures or comply with new regulations, carbon pricing mechanisms, or emissions reduction targets. Climate-related opportunities refer to the positive effects of climate change events on organizations when they implement mitigation and adaptation actions. There are 5 categories of climate-related opportunities: resource efficiency, energy source, products and services, markets, and resilience. The impacts of those opportunities can be the following: cost savings, efficiency in energy use, adoption of new technologies, investments in green projects, and development of low-emission products. The need for companies to be accountable for their climate-related risks and opportunities has led to an increase in demand for carbon information. Given the urgent need for climate action, stakeholders are putting ongoing pressure on companies to manage and disclose environmental issues, including communicating their performance, mitigation and adaptation actions, and emission reduction activities. This slide gives an overview of the standards and frameworks that companies can use when reporting on climate change. The Global Reporting Initiative offers the most widely used standards for sustainability reporting, and some specific standards are directly related to climate change, such as water, GHG emissions, biodiversity, and waste. The recommendations of the TCFD address the increasing demand from investors for better climate disclosure and support companies in disclosing climate-related information according to the following 4 main core areas: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. In 2023, the International Financial Reporting Standards was established to develop high-quality and globally accepted sustainability standards. The IFRS S2 climate change standard supports companies in disclosing information about the effects of climate-related risks and opportunities. Within the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards play a key role in supporting organizations in disclosing their material impacts, risks, and opportunities related to environmental, social, and governance matters. The reference standard for climate change is the ESRS E1. This thematic standard helps companies understand their impact on climate change, assess their transition to a sustainable economy, and analyze the actions taken to address climate risks and opportunities. So first of all, why is biodiversity important? There are many answers to that question, but first of all species have intrinsic value in themselves. From an ethical perspective, we have an obligation to preserve them for the future. Another reason is that everything in nature is connected through complex food webs. You can see an example of a food web here, and the arrows show who eats who in this aquatic ecosystem. Illustrations of food webs like this are commonly very simplified. In reality, they can be much more complex. Another reason is that biodiverse ecosystems are more resilient to disturbances. They can better withstand environmental changes like climate change, diseases, or invasive species. So, the loss of biodiversity has substantial effects on the environment. The primary consequences are presented here: disruption of ecosystem balance, reduced resilience to changes and disturbances like environmental changes, invasive species, and diseases. Loss of keystone species, loss of genetic resources, degraded water quality, and disrupted water cycles, soil degradation and erosion, increased risk of ecosystem collapse. Loss of biodiversity affects not only the environment, but also, to a large extent, us humans. The loss of biodiversity affects us in many ways. It affects our health, culture, and quality of life. Food and water security are threatened as ecosystems lose their ability to provide essential resources. Indigenous peoples and local communities who depend directly on natural resources are especially vulnerable. Cultural values are lost when important species and landscapes disappear. Reduced social resilience, fewer species mean we are more vulnerable to threats like disease or climate change. In summary, the loss of biodiversity means a loss of ecosystem services that we depend on for our survival. Ecosystem services are the benefits and services that nature provides, which are essential for human survival and well-being. These include everything from food and clean water to recreation and climate regulation. Many ecosystem services depend on biodiversity, and a loss of this would also lead to lower production of many of the ecosystem services that we humans depend on for our survival. There are different types of ecosystem services and also different ways to categorize them. Here we see a division into 4 categories based on the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. The 4 categories are provisioning services, that are products we obtain directly from the ecosystems, such as food or drinking water. regulating services that help regulate ecosystem processes such as climate regulation or pollination. Cultural services are non-material benefits provided by nature, such as recreation and aesthetic experiences. The fourth category is supporting services, which are fundamental ecological processes that enable all other services to function. Examples include photosynthesis and nutrient cycling. Biodiversity is a foundation for a sustainable economy. Reduced biodiversity can cause losses in agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. Many ecosystem services are currently free, like pollination and water purification, but become expensive to replace with technology. Loss of species can mean lost opportunities for new medicines and innovations. Tourism and recreation may decline as natural values disappear. These are the key takeaways to remember at the end of this module. Firstly, extreme climatic phenomena, global warming, and biodiversity loss events are steadily increasing, and their consequences affect both humanity and species. Then, addressing climate change and biodiversity loss requires action at all levels: local, national, and international. Solutions include reducing emissions, transitioning to renewable energy sources, and adopting sustainable practices across industries. Decarbonization is critical, involving a shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources and improved energy efficiency. Thank you for your attention.